Before the arrival of the Spanish colonizers in the Philippines in the 16th century, the barangays were well-organized independent villages, and in some cases, cosmopolitan sovereign principalities, which functioned much like a city-state. The barangay was the dominant organizational pattern among indigenous communities in the Philippine archipelago. The name barangay originated from balangay, a Malay word meaning sailboat. Difference from the modern civilization, the word barangay in modern use refers to the smallest administrative division in the Philippines, also known by its former Spanish adopted name, the barrio. This modern context for the use of the term barangay was adopted during the administration of President Ferdinand Marcos when he ordered the replacement of the old barrios and municipal councils. This act was eventually codified under the 1991 Local Government Code. There are a number of distinctions between the modern barangay or barrio, and the city-states and independent principalities encountered by the Spanish when they first arrived in 1521 and established relatively permanent settlements in 1574. The most glaring difference would be that the modern entity represents a geographical entity, the pre-colonial barangays represented loyalty to a particular head. Even during the early days of Spanish rule, it was not unusual for people living beside each other to actually belong to different barangays. They owed their loyalty to different datus. Also, while the modern barangay represents only the smallest administrative unit of government, the barangay of pre-colonial times was either independent, or belonged to what was only a loose confederation of several barangays, over which the rulers picked among themselves who would be foremost, known as the Pangulo or Raja. In most cases, his function was to make decisions which would involve multiple barangays, such as disputes between members of two different barangays. Internally, each duchy retained his jurisdiction. Description: historically, the first barangays started as relatively small communities of around 50 to 100 families. Most villages have only 30 to 100 houses and the population varies from 100 to 500 persons. When the Spaniards came, they found communities with 20 to 30 people only. They also encountered large and prestigious principalities. Theories, as well as local oral traditions, say that the original barangays were coastal settlements formed as a result of the migration of these Malayo-Polynesian people by boat from other places in Southeast Asia. Most of the ancient barangays were coastal or riverine in nature. This is because most of the people were relying on fishing for supply of protein and for their livelihood. They also traveled mostly by water up and down rivers, and along the coasts. Trails always followed river systems, which were also a major source of water for bathing, washing, and drinking. The coastal villages were more accessible to trade with foreigners. These were ideal places for economic activity to develop. Business with traders from other countries also meant contact with other cultures and civilizations, such as those of Japan, Han Chinese, Indian people, and Arab people. In time, these coastal communities acquired more advanced cultures, with developed social structures, ruled by established royalties and nobilities. Social organization and stratification: the barangays in some coastal places in Fanao, Manila, Cebu, Jolo, and Butuan, with cosmopolitan cultures and trade relations with other countries in Asia, were already established principalities before the coming of the Spaniards. In these regions, even though the majority of these barangays were not large settlements, yet they had organized societies dominated by the same type of recognized aristocracy, as those found in established principalities. The aristocratic group in these pre-colonial societies was called the Dachi class. Its members were presumably the descendants of the first settlers on the land or, in the case of later arrivals, of those who were datus at the time of migration or conquest. Some of these principalities have remained, even until the present, in unhispanized and mostly Islamized parts of the Philippines, in Mindanao. Social organization and stratification of pre-colonial principalities in the Visaras, in more developed barangays and Visaras which were never conquered by Spain but were subjugated as vassals by means of pacts, peace treaties, and reciprocal alliances. The Dachu was at the top of the social order in a Sakop or Hayop. This social order was divided into three classes. The members of the Tramao class were the nobility of pure royal descent, compared by the Boxer Codex to the titled Spanish lords. Below the Chamao were the vassal warrior class known as the Timoa, characterized by the Jesuit priest Francisco Ignacio Alcina as the third rank of nobility, and by the conquistador Miguel de Lorca as free men, neither chiefs nor slaves. These were people of lower nobility who were required to render military service to the Daciu in hunts, land wars, or sea raids. Aside from this, the Timoa also paid taxes and tribute and were sometimes called upon for agricultural labor to the Daciu, though the personal vassals of the Daciu may be exempt from such obligations. Below the Timoa were the Oripun class, who rendered services to the Chamao and Timoa for debts or favors. To maintain purity of bloodline, the Chamao usually marry only among their kind, often seeking high-ranking brides in other barangay, abducting them, or contracting brideprices in gold, slaves and jewelry. Meanwhile, the Daciu keep their marriageable daughters secluded for protection and prestige. These well-guarded and protected high-born women were called binakot, and the Daciu of pure descent were called Potlimgar Daciu or Lubasngar Daciu. Social organization and stratification of pre-colonial principalities in the Tagalog region, the different type of culture prevalent in Luzon gave a less stable and more complex social structure to the pre-colonial Tagalog barangays of Manila, Pampanga and Laguna. Enjoying a more extensive commerce than those in Visoras, having the influence of Bonian political contacts, and engaging in farming wet rice for a living, the Tagalogs were described by the Spanish Augustinian friar Martin de Rada as more traders than warriors. The more complex social structure of the Tagalogs was less stable during the arrival of the Spaniards because it was still in a process of differentiating. A Jesuit priest Francisco Colin made an attempt to give an approximate comparison of it with the Visayan social structure in the middle of the 17th century. The term Daciu or Lakan, or Apu refers to the chief, but the noble class to which the Daciu belonged to was known as the Majanu class. Any male member of the Majanu class can become a Daciu by personal achievement. The term Timoa referring to freemen came into use in the social structure of the Tagalogs within just 20 years after the coming of the Spaniards. The term, however, was being incorrectly applied to former Alipin who have escaped bondage by payment, favor, or flight. Moreover, the Tagalog Timoa did not have the military prominence of the Visayan Timoa. The equivalent warrior class in the Tagalog society was present only in Laguna, and they were known as the Maharlika class. At the bottom of the social hierarchy are the members of the Alipin class. There are two main subclasses of the Alipin class. The Aliping Namamahay who own their own houses and serve their masters by paying tribute or working on their fields were the commoners and serfs, while the Aliping Zargigilid who lived in their masters' houses were the servants and slaves. Hispanization. Upon the arrival of the Spanish, smaller ancient barangays were combined to form towns. Every barangay within a town was headed by the Cabeza de Barangay, who formed part of the Principala, the elite ruling class of the municipalities of the Spanish Philippines. This position was inherited from the Daciu, and came to be known as such during the Spanish regime. The Spanish monarch ruled each barangay through the Cabeza, who also collected taxes from the residents for the Spanish crown. References. See also, Barangay.